Did somebody order some receivers? We got them here for you on Operation Domination. Who's our number one? Who's better between Emeka Egbuka and Tre Harris? Or perhaps a Jalen Knoll and a Matthew Golden? All that and more on Operation Domination.
Operation Domination is underway. The ultimate game plan to dominate your NFL experience. With your hosts, Dan
You gotta be confident about your Achilles when you
Chase
show up.
Thornton,
Yeah, I mean, I got him at
Chris Dow.
All right, well, we're just going to cut that because the intro video apparently is having a little glitchy problem. But you know who we are. You know who we all are. I'm Dan Mater. I'm joined here with Chris D. I got Adam LaRue in the building. And after a long hiatus, Chase Thornton's finally back with us for the wide receiver episode. But we also have a guest who comes on now every year, and I always wait for it every single year. Makes me super excited. Let's get him introduced. And now, the moment you've all been waiting for, the legendary Fantasy Pros host, the one, the only, Pat Fitzmaurice!
Wow, Dan, channeling former Chicago Bulls PA announcer Ray Clay. I appreciate that. Thanks for having me back. Great to join you and Chris and Adam and Chase again. And looking forward to digging into this wide receiver class because sometimes I don't know how I feel about it. And there are points in my rankings where things are pretty bunched up, and maybe you guys will help give me clarity on how I can separate some of these guys.
The separation has been the key really for everybody, right? Like, I think you got some people that are like, oh, this is a weak class. You're not getting any value out of it. And on the flip side, you got guys like, well, look, I mean, with the value of where they expect it to be drafted, there's some guys that can do some damage here. I think the answer is somewhere in between. Hopefully we're going to be able to get through all that. Talking about wide receivers, let's just jump right into this thing. Number one on all of our boards, when we did the rankings on the outline, every single one of us has Tet McMillan as the wide receiver one. Now, there's been some controversy from other people about should he be the wide receiver one. Some people are trying to make the argument for Luther Burden now. Should it be Travis Hunter? Hunter, we're going to have a discussion about him a little bit later on the show. Pat, I'll start with you. With McMillan, one of the things that I think he has maybe lost some traction on, not too much, but as of late, was the pro day. And the wide-ranging reported 40 times from a 4.48 to a 4.57. And this isn't like guys on X just like randomly coming out with numbers so they hand time things. These are reliable sources from PFF to Athletics to the ESPN, all have different wide-ranging numbers. I mentioned this with Cam Scatabo last week when we talked about running backs. I kind of want to mention it here with you too. So it's a two-part question, really. Does the wide-ranging part of the 40-yard dash change your mind on Tetero in any kind of capacity? And number two, if you're a player whose maybe long speed isn't a bit of a question, and you don't run at the combine, knowing that if you run your pro day, you're going to get this wide range where no one's going to know what to think, why do it?
It's a good question. The second one I would have a hard time answering. The first one, does it bother me that much? I guess not all that much. I think we knew that Tet was not going to melt stopwatches when he ran. And he's not that kind of a guy. It's sort of like Tre Harris, for example, is another guy in this class who's like that. Just when you watch him play, you know, like speed is not his thing. And you just hope he's sub 4.6. You know he's not going to be 4.4 something. And sure enough, I think Tre Harris was 4.5 something, exactly what we expected. I'd rather see Tet closer to 4.48 or whatever than 4.57, but not a deal breaker for me if the 4.57 is closer to the truth.
I mean, it didn't hurt him in deep catches, right? Guys, like he was 21st. It didn't hurt him in deep yards. He was 21st in that as well, actually. It's the guy who uses his body, who gets the contested catches, who runs good routes. We'll get into that more in a minute, but I want to ask Chase this because we haven't been able to talk to Chase in a little bit while. But that video servicing about him commenting about how he doesn't watch film. Now, I want to preface this by saying that didn't come out during his pro day. Like, he didn't come out with the video this past pro day and say, I don't watch film. This was from a podcast, I think 2 or maybe even 3 years ago.
It was his freshman year.
Yeah, so exactly. So 2 or 3 years ago at this point. So this wasn't like yesterday. All right. So everybody needs to kind of calm down on that part. But Chase, if a wide receiver tells you that they don't watch film outside of their wide receiver group room, is that something that bothers you from that position?
No, especially as you said, not as a freshman on a podcast 3 years ago before he'd had really any of the before he'd had any of that coaching as to how to handle himself as a prospect and as somebody in the public eye, and before he'd really had a chance to be around a Division I program for any length of time and really learn his craft, his profession. Let's be honest about it. No, I'm not worried about that at all. If he's watching when he's supposed to be watching with the team and that kind of thing, it obviously didn't hurt him from a play standpoint, is in my opinion. I mean, the guy played inside, he played outside, he found good ways to beat zone, so it's not like he's a football unintelligent guy. I really think that he still deserves that top spot there. We all wigged out that Kyler Murray wasn't, watching film every second of the day and was playing too many video games. Well, this is a kid who was a freshman in college when he said that. Anybody who's going to let anything from their freshman year in college, was that?
And he's not a quarterback.
Yeah, and he's not a quarterback. He's a wide receiver. He's watching enough to know and figure out and learn the tendencies and the play, the play calling and the game plan for that week. No, that's much ado about nothing, but it's draft, it's draft month, so we got to find something to talk about.
Look, as long as my center, my quarterback watch film, everybody else take a vacation. I don't care. Just show up and play. No, I'm just kidding, but it's kind of how it goes with that position. Okay, so Adam and Chris, you both also have Tet right there at number 1. We'll start with Chris. What makes Tet number 1 in your eyes?
I think this is a guy that had a lot of pressure on him to dominate this entire season, had a lot of tension on Arizona. Look, this isn't a great Arizona team in general. They kind of bounced onto jumped onto the spectrum last year as a team that kind of, did better than people expected them to do. The offense was better. And then this past year, they kind of declined all around because once they got that attention, you saw kind of the team that wasn't as good as they hoped it to be. But Tet was consistent, and he basically had similar numbers, had similar yards per catch. Consistently, was a guy that can catch it. You can put it inside, you can put it outside. A guy that reminded me a lot of Larry Fitzgerald. I think overall, when you kind of look at his skill set, you look at the 4.55. Pat talked about. T. Higgins ran around that. So did Larry Fitz. Like I said, those kinds of guys aren't usually beating you down the field. Their speed, what they're beating you with is their ability to kind of break in and out of their strides, get open, read zones. And I think this guy does all those things really well. I think people are trying to find things to kind of nitpick with him. And because he didn't have some kind of wowing speed that everybody wants to be enamored with, I think they forget how tall this guy is, how much of a catch radius he has, and his ability at that height to get in and out of his breaks, how that can create this natural separation. So he's definitely one of the guys I think is a stud, and people are just kind of wanting to figure out reasons and not hate on for some reason.
I mean, look, it's draft time, right? We start the guys who've been the number 1 spot for months now, we have to start nitpicking them because we're running out of content. Not that it can never happen in the NFL, but that's kind of what winds up happening as we get closer to draft day. Adam, where did Tet grade out for you? Just in a comparison, to either history or the rest of his class?
He's my 1. I have my top 3, and I'll give a spoiler. That includes my grade of if Travis Hunter does come out as a receiver. I know that there's, some interesting quirks of how we rank that, right? But if that was to be the case, he would be up in that group as well. But I have those 3 in a bunch, and then there's a bit of a gap. And then as far as previous classes, I think I have him right about in line with where I had a Brian Thomas last year. So outside of that top 3 guys that I really, really liked, but in that next step, definitely a first round talent, even someone who in last year's class I would have been perfectly happy taking in the teens, but not quite, the elite group up at the top there.
I did hear.
I would have.
Well, Chris, I was going to kind of say, I've heard a lot of people who are pro Tet now trying to make the argument that him and Roma Dunze are very comparable players. Very different stylistically, in my opinion, with those two, but the measurables are kind of similar in that sense. You want my comp? I'm going to give you guys my comp. I want to see what Pat's reaction is to my comp here. AJ Green Remember, AJ Green was a guy who ran a 4.5. He wasn't a blazer, used his body, used his length, and was able to get separation down the field nonetheless because he was a glider. I see a lot of the same things from Tet, from the way they shift their hips in and out of their breaks, especially on posts and on dig routes, and the way they can use their bodies in the red zone on top of it. I keep hearing the Drake London thing. I've heard some people use the Mike Evans thing. I understand that, but Tet doesn't play with the same type of physicality that those two play. That's not really his game. But the smoother, slicker finesse, I know how to use my body type, the AJ Green type. That's kind of what I see Tet as. What do you think, Pat?
I like that. Great comp. I mean, if he turns out that well, what a career he's going to have. And AJ Green was really, I always think of how well he used to work the sidelines, and I don't know if I've seen quite as much of that from Tet, but yeah, I think that's a good comp. Chris mentioned T. Higgins earlier, and that's like the comp that I can't get out of my head with Tet. I mean, he reminds me a lot of what we saw from T when he was at Clemson.
No, it's a very good comp as well. Just to wrap this up, like, look, Tet, 18th in contested catches. The guy, I don't see any issue with separation. I keep bringing it up because some people have tried to kind of poo-poo him on that a little bit, like especially down the field, and I don't see those issues. Chris, to your point, I saw a guy who wasn't playing with the best talent in the world, especially at quarterback position, to always hit him. Kind of similar to what, I don't want to get too spoilers, but Tre Harris for me, a lot of times on the deep ball, having to come back to it instead of being able to fill out his finish out his route, be able to finish out that separation. But Tet is our number one. So with that, our next topic is going to be a showdown. You get the general idea. Okay, so now we go to our showdown bracket. Pat is going to be taking on Chris. Who's the wide receiver 2 of the class? Pat will be representing Emeka Egbuka, and Chris will be representing Tre Harris. Adam is going to judge this thing. Take it away, fellas. Start with Pat.
All right. So I do think maybe Emeka Egbuka has the safest floor of any player in this class. Just terrific, accomplished slot receiver who might be able to play Z in the NFL level. 2 years of outstanding productivity at Ohio State with kind of a down year in 2023 because of injuries. 10 touchdown catches in both of his full seasons. And just this advanced route runner who gets into his routes quickly, makes sharp cuts, seems to understand leverage, which is part of what makes him such a good slot man, sets up defenders for his moves, and then bang, he just makes his break and separates. What I like about him from a fantasy perspective, Egbuka was never the best wide receiver on his own team. He has played with, Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, Marvin Harrison Jr., Jeremiah Smith. And I'm not going to be bothered if he goes to a team either, not only in the draft, but later on in his career that has other good receivers, because I'm confident that he is going to carve out his own niche just as he did at Ohio State. And there were so many times I would watch OSU games where, you're looking for Marvin Harrison and Jeremiah Smith kind of focused on those guys. And Emeka Egbuka is the guy who ends up slitting your throat. So I'm really confident in this guy fitting in somewhere, being really good. I don't know if he's ever going to be a 1,300-yard guy, but I think he's going to have multiple 1,000-yard seasons and just be a really, really professional slot receiver, a guy you're happy to start in fantasy every week.
Go ahead, Adam.
All right, so
Chris, take it away.
So for me, I have Tre Harris as my number 2. Look, to me, this is going a singles hitter versus a home run hitter. Egbuka is a nice player. You talked about the safe floor. I agree, Pat. He's got a safe floor. Guy reminds me of Tyler Boyd, a guy that maybe can play the Z. I think Moore is going to probably wind up being a slot receiver. Played slot 75% of the time in college. A guy who doesn't beat you deep. I mean, he had 5 catches he caught past 35 yards the entire season last year. He only had 8 targets. So it's not something that he's going to get on the field. They weren't even utilizing necessarily down the field as an explosive player. A guy that had production 2022, had a down year, had a nice bounce back last year, but isn't a guy who has elite separation skills. Isn't a guy that's like great yards after catch. So I think he's a guy who definitely can get open, can kind of get, is going to be a solid receiver. But I see a very limited upside for when it comes to fantasy versus Tre Harris, who's a guy that I feel like it must be the 40 Dan because he ran a 4.54 and everybody just wants to figure a reason to start poo-pooing on Tre Harris. But they love Jackson Dart, and they seem to overlook the fact that Tre Harris was the guy who was making him look good. Tre Harris was the one getting down the field and making plays consistently. He was the one catching the screens and using the yards after the catch. So just give you some Tre Harris numbers. I mean, guy 6'2", 205, came out of Louisiana Tech and stepped up a grade against SEC's competition, you would think, but actually his numbers improved. So I hear a lot of things about Mississippi State's system and kind of creating him. I don't buy that. I haven't seen other receivers in Mississippi recently, necessarily benefit from being Lane Kiffin's system. And all of a sudden we're like, oh, wow, look at these receivers because the numbers they have in Lane Kiffin's system. The thing he gets for that is he doesn't see a lot of press release. He didn't have a lot of press coverage, so we definitely work on those things. But Dan, just in general, a guy who had 5.15 yards per route run last year, only played 8 games, but in those 8 games was averaging 128 yards per game. Had 25 plays over 15 yards or more, had 13 plays of over 25 yards or more. Like I said, in an 8-game stretch. The season before 2023 had a solid year, 3.2 yards per route run. So over those 2 seasons, PFF's highest guy for those 2 years combined. And then you look at what he was able to do in the red zone and, with the yak stuff. So a guy who can be a 50-50 ball guy, a guy who can catch it close to the things. I think the route tree needs to improve a little bit, but overall, I think this guy's got a potential to be a guy who could also line up in a slot moving forward. And I'm going to go for the higher upside guy who I've shown production consistently and has a good yard per catch, has all the things that we kind of look for metrics wise. So I'm just kind of, other than the separation rate, which was still 88th percentile in PFF over 2 years, the single versus man coverage, it wasn't as high, but I still something, as you alluded to, kind of kicked this off. I think a lot of that was because of Jackson Dart and where his quote unquote accuracy issues are.
All right, Pat, you got a rebuttal?
I don't. Some excellent points by Chris. I would just say, I thought Tre Harris at times looked a little sort of lumbering, like the lack of speed showed up a little bit when I would watch him at Ole Miss. And I just wonder if that's going to be an issue with him separating when he gets to the NFL level and is going against even faster, more athletic cornerbacks. But
Can I ask?
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to ask to that point, though, Pat. He played in SEC. I mean, what other competition is he going to see at corners? And he averaged 17 yards per catch last year, 18 yards the previous season, which was more than he averaged in Louisiana Tech. So he saw better competition, and his statistics actually increased, and his yards per catch, the explosiveness, in a sense, got better.
For sure. And there are some things to really like about him. What a bull he is after the catch. It seemed like whenever I watched him, he would win most of his hand fighting battles against defenders. So, there's a lot to like. And I know my colleague Derek Brown of Fantasy Pros loves Tre Harris, loves him. I think he has him as either his wide receiver 2 or wide receiver 3 in the class. I can't recall which.
And I'm not going to say he's going to wind up being this good, Dan, but my comp for him would be Michael Irvin coming out. He has a lot of similar skill sets to Michael Irvin and ran a similar 40 as well.
Well, it's funny because I comped them to Des Bryant, another Cowboys wide receiver, but mostly because of the violence that he plays the position with. And I love that out of ex-perimeter wide receivers, the guys who go out and get it and are afraid to use their physicality. And I know with Des Bryant, at least, he's maybe about 15 pounds lighter, about the same height. Ran a little bit faster 40, though. Remember, guys, Des Bryant only ran a 4.57. He wasn't blazing it out there, but he plays that same kind of level of violence. But I'm stepping on Adam's toes. So, Adam.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. These are really good argument. For me, I have both of these guys towards the top of my second tier of receivers. So neither of these guys, surprisingly, I know for some people, are in my top 3. But I do like both of them a lot. I think they're both really good players. I kind of agree with Pat's testament at the beginning in the sense of Egbuka being one of the highest floor players in this class. But overall, I am a bit of a gambler, especially when it comes to premium assets towards the top of rookie drafts. So I slightly prefer Tre Harris. And I think the biggest reason that I'll say with that is I agree with you on the speed sometimes showing up, but I also agree. I think you brought it up towards the end that he does win those hand fighting duels a lot. I think he wins at the line of scrimmage so much that I can accept like some of the losses on the speed toward down the field. Again, these are both like I have them really, really tight. They're in the same tier for me. Really good players, really good arguments. Thanks.
Well done as the judge, Adam. Well done as the judge. I just want to throw this one last point out here with Tre Harris. Over 5 yards per out run. I mean, just absolutely
5.15.
positively insane. But I also want to say this. And let me get on a big screen here because I'm tired of just you guys seeing my little itty bitty face while I'm doing the talking. There we go. The other thing I want to say though, I also have Emeka number 3. So like I had these guys literally back to back. It's Tre at number 2, Emeka at number 3 for me, because kind of what Pat said. He's a day one starter who's going to come in right now. I comp him to Chris Godwin. I think that there's no question in my mind that he can play the Z along with the Y. Because he had to go through the competition level he did at Ohio State and still got targets. Let's not like he was never left out of the picture despite all the talent they had around him. Combine that with what I love to see on his route running, but I'm going to take it a step further. Coaches are going to love him because he's willing to do all the little dirty things of the wide receiver position as well as a blocker. That's what I think is going to mostly get him on the field right away. So, yeah, that's why I have a comp to Chris Godwin. This is why they're my wide receiver 2s and 3s, which is why I thought Adam should be the judge because I wouldn't be able to decide at all one way or another. Okay, so now we have another debate to have here. Maybe. Man, these clips, man, they are not loving me today. So while I get them shuffled around, let's have that Travis Hunter conversation. Because Pat, you had Travis Hunter, in your top 4 wide receiver rankings, if I'm looking at it correctly. Number 3. So I want to know what your process is putting him number 3, knowing that everyone in America has the question, what position are you even going to play?
Yeah, admittedly, Dan, it's kind of a placeholder ranking because we don't know. And before I had him much lower, but I think we're starting to maybe see some rays of hope that he plays a lot more wide receiver than I thought, because I kind of thought all along he would be mostly a cornerback and sort of a part-time wide receiver. It just seems like that's an easier way for teams to go, to use him, as a 4th wide receiver, which maybe limits him to a 30% offensive snap share, somewhere thereabouts. And, gives him a taste of offense, but mostly defense. It's kind of hard to go the other way and have him be a full-time receiver and a part-time corner. And I just made this point to some of my colleagues on one of our shows where, if you're trying to only play him as like a dime defensive back and some wide receiver is like wreaking havoc on your defense, like it's going to be really hard to limit his snaps and keep him on the bench while some guy's rampaging all over you. And you realize that this guy might be your one chance to stop this receiver. So on the other hand, though, now the teams that look most likely to wind up with Travis Hunter, Cleveland, I believe their general manager, Andrew Berry, is the one guy who's come out and said he sees him as more of a wide receiver first because his ball skills are the best thing about him, and he gets to do that more as a wide receiver, strut his ball skills more there than he does as a corner. Got the Giants, who are pretty set at cornerback, I think, and not so set at wide receiver. I mean, they're going to run out Darius Slayton in 3 wide receiver sets. So how set can you be? And, if he does somehow get to New England definitely needs a wide receiver more than they need a cornerback. So all the landing spots are looking pretty optimistic. The one thing is, though, you never know when he might go somewhere or be in a situation where they flip the switch and make him primarily a cornerback. And, that's the rug pull you don't want if you've got Travis Hunter on your fantasy.
Yeah, absolutely. You guys got the audio? We're good there? Because there was a little hiccup there at the end. I think we're okay. Yeah, so it's funny you said the Browns because there's more. It was Abdul Carter, right? The last couple of weeks, I heard nothing about Abdul Carter. Now this past week, I'm hearing more and more. It's going to be Travis Hunter for the Cleveland Browns. And like to your point, he's the one guy who came out and said that I view him more as a wide receiver. So because of that, right now, like for me, I don't have Travis Hunter in my top 12 at wide receivers. And it's more from the standpoint of logically, when I look at this thing, when we talk about players who play both ways, to me, logically, it's easier, or I shouldn't even say easier, but better suited for him to be a full-time corner with a wide receiver who has a sub package. I feel like it's easier to practice that. It's easier to game plan that for week to week to have him involved that way. I think it's harder to do it the other way. To your point, are you just putting him out there in dime packages and then he's mostly a wide receiver? What I do know for sure for all of you like Shohei Ohtani people out there, like, why can't he do it both or whatever the case may be? He ain't playing 150 snaps a game. That I know for sure. So everyone needs to cool it down with that. When I look at him at a wide receiver, so let's talk about that part of this. I am more impressed with Travis Hunter as a cornerback than I am as a wide receiver, as much as the fantasy community will want to kill me for that because they want to be able to draft Travis Hunter. I understand it. As a wide receiver, I have a lot of questions. I don't love his route running. Now, part of that, limited route tree, didn't always get to develop it fully. Could argue that's untapped potential. I wouldn't argue too hard with you there. But my comp for him was Ted Ginn just focusing in as a wide receiver where you're good with ball skills. You are explosive. I want to get in your hands in space and screens and drags and nine routes and all that stuff. But the in-betweens, the ins and outs, the actually winning on the line of scrimmage, I don't see that consistently. Even though he had a great year. I mean, 96 catches and over 1,200 yards and 15 touchdowns. But a lot of that came against, sub competition that Colorado was playing. So those are some of my concerns. I don't know. You guys chime in here. Chase, what do you got on Travis, man?
No, man, we're talking about a guy that could be a standout top 10 type player at either position if he would just pick one and go with it. I kind of wish he'd forget that full-time two-way dream. This isn't Chuck Bednarik back in the 60s. This is the modern NFL. And like you said, he's not playing 150 snaps a game. Unfortunately, it is easier, I think, if there is an easy component to it. It is going to be easier for him to play defense and then come off the bench for packages and gimmicks on offense. But if he goes somewhere and focuses on that wide receiver, I have him already at number 4. I might have him up at 3 if I knew that he was going to be that. I think I saw a report today that said that a recent poll of NFL GMs had just over half of them see him specifically totally as a corner, and then the other half see the receiver part of it. But yeah, if he does go to Cleveland, they've said they see him as a wide receiver. We know they could use him there. If he went somewhere like that, I probably would have him in my top 3. It is kind of a placeholder ranking, like Pat said, but I mean, the things that I feel like we might fault him for as a receiver are things that I think could be improved on if he were playing receiver full time. He didn't spend any time in that wide receiver room at Colorado State. He wasn't at Colorado, pardon me. He wasn't watching film with them. He wasn't necessarily practicing with them. And we've kind of talked about why that, defense was the craft you have to focus on. It feels like that kid that's like really, really fast, but he's really good at baseball. So he plays baseball, and then every once in a while he runs a track meet, and we're faulting him for the fact that his starts aren't perfect in the sprints. Well, if he was at track practice all the time, his starts would be perfect. I think that if this guy was focusing on one or the other, he definitely shows top level potential as a wide receiver. Unfortunately, we kind of got to wait 2 weeks to see, where that happens. And it literally should be about 2 weeks from tomorrow. So,
yeah. Adam, what do you have him graded better as?
I have him graded better as a corner, but I have a first-round grade. I'm very high on him in both position. Like, just separating the two halves of him and grading him individually as one and individually as the other. I mean, I just think, it's an athletic thing, right? Like, there's the ball skills, but then there's also, like, there's just not dudes who move their feet like he moves his feet, like naturally. Like, his footwork, I think if he really dedicated himself to wide receiver or corner for that matter, but like dedicating himself to one, like his natural footwork is so insane that like actually dedicating that and like learning that, like I agree his route tree isn't great, but boy, like it feels like it would be not that hard to teach him to be really, really good at it, because I think he has really solid instincts. And I just think the way he can turn his hips and the way that he can move his feet quickly, break down, it's going to translate to routes very, very quickly if that is the route that they go down.
Chris, what do you have to add here?
I think you guys are a little bit higher, definitely on Travis Hunter than I am as a receiver. Look, this is number one player on my board by far in his draft. I love the athlete, but we've seen this before, and we keep acting like this guy's the most incredible thing we've ever seen before. And I just have some questions for you guys. For example, his size, 6 foot, $188. Is that going to be an issue getting off press coverage? Is that going to be an issue with him blocking in the NFL? Things that he hasn't really shown you in Colorado. You saw the size show up on the opposite side of the field. We'll get to the receiver down a little bit, but versus Stanford, he got beat up at the line of scrimmage by the receiver for Stanford over and over again. That was an issue. Does that show up when he's have defensive backs that are 6'2" and 200 pounds and put their hands on him? The route tree we talked about. Dan, he ran 24% of his routes were curls, 22% were slants. So 50% of his routes were a curl or a slant. The other big ones he ran a 9, 14.5 times, and a dig, 13.4. So basically 75% of his routes that he ran last year were 4 routes. All routes were basically close to the line of scrimmage or you run a go. And then we talk about the speed and the phenomenal athlete, big play. He averaged 12.9 yards over his career as a receiver, 13 yards around last year. This is the same guy that plays in the same conference as Tet, as the Iowa State receivers we'll get to later on. So it's the production, yes, was good, but other guys who had similar production, similar target shares have better numbers, have better touchdown numbers, better big play touchdown numbers. So get back to the big play part of it. I look at Champ Bailey as somebody that, like I said, did this before. You look at Champ Bailey's last year as a junior year as a receiver, had 744 yards, 47 catches at Georgia. That's basically the same numbers that you saw for Travis Hunter his junior year, about 750 yards, more catches, but less yards per catch. Champ was more explosive. He ran a 4.28. We don't know what he ran. We don't know how great an athlete. Yes, there's a lot of things that get excited about Hunter, but we have a lot of things where the lore of him, I think, versus what we actually see. This isn't Deion. Champ Bailey was a record setter when he ran his 40. So this isn't a guy that I see speed necessarily showing up at 4.2 out there, a guy who makes everybody miss and has gigantic plays over and over again. I think this is a guy that has great ball skills, like you talked about, has good feet. But as a receiver, this is a second or third round grade on this guy. He's got a lot of work to do, and it's hard to learn how to do that in the NFL. You usually have that kind of something that you already have a skill set for. If you're that light and you don't have a great release tree, it's going to be hard for you to all of a sudden learn how to get up cross coverage and start building up skills that coaches can trust you. And you'll become a bust, quote unquote. So I just think corner should be the way he goes, Dan. I think the gimmick, in terms of the packages, he could definitely be a third receiver for a team. And I don't think he can definitely be a guy who could be a starting receiver. I just think that this OBJ and Garrett Wilson talk is a little too much for me, where I just haven't seen that. And statistically, it's not matching up.
So you're more in line with me than when I complimented Ted Ginn. I think we're kind of hitting on some of the same points with that. Pat, you got anything to add to that?
I don't. Chris makes some really good points. I do think the ball skills will play in the NFL, and the guy's just such a good athlete. I have no doubt that he would improve as a wide receiver, but totally agree with you guys that he's kind of there as a cornerback, not so much as a wide receiver.
Okay. All right. So let's get into the showdown. Let's just try this drop. They're supposed to meet in the middle, just so everybody knows. They're supposed to be this is professional podcasting at its finest. This is what this is, okay? All right, so we got Adam, we got Chase, we got another debate. So Chase is going with Luther Burden, and Adam has Jayden Higgins. Which one is better? Chase, we'll go first with your Luther Burden.
Yeah, I love me some Luther Burden. I kind of can't get enough of watching tape on the dude. He's just fun to watch. I have him as my number 2 wide receiver, honestly, in this class, Luther Burden. We're talking about a guy that was first team SEC, second team All-American as a sophomore at Missouri at the wide receiver position. So, I mean, that's kind of a shocker to begin with there. But, he's a guy that's good, against both man and zone coverages. I think Matt Harmon of Reception Perception kind of called him sort of a better man coverage beating Rashee Rice, because he finds a way to get off the line. He finds a way to get open. He also finds a way to find that soft spot in the zone, sit and get the catch, make the catch, and then he can do what he does afterwards. He adjusts well to throws while the ball's in the air. He figures out a way to find the football. Guy had an 85.9% catch rate. I mean, that's just phenomenal. He's got strong hands. He's got late hands. Late, some guys call it sudden hands, where, at the end, where, he gets his hands up at the end and is ready for the catch there. But what really is fun is after the football gets in his hands, he's elite after the catch. He's built kind of more like a little bit more like a running back. Moves like one. I know that. There's been a lot of Deebo Samuel comparisons. And honestly, when I think of the Deebo Samuel comparisons, I think some people are looking at that as a little bit of a negative, maybe trying to pigeonhole Luther Burden as a gimmick player. And the route tree that he ran in college kind of backs that up a little bit. I mean, they threw him everything below 10 yards down the field. They got in the ball on screens a lot and a lot of those kinds of things. But what they were trying to do was just get the ball in his hands in space and let him work. This was not a real sophisticated offense in terms of, their route conceptions here. But I see the Deebo comparison not so much as the gimmick player, but like I said, more as to what he can do after the ball's in his hands. He was a punt returner. He was a very successful return man. And that kind of shows up when he gets the ball in his hands. He moves, he finds the areas, he finds his blocks, he figures out a way to get downfield and gain more yardage. And then on top of all that, he's a capable, feisty, physical blocker too when he's out on the field, despite not being necessarily the biggest guy. And I think that's the kind of thing that will play in the NFL because he can do all of those kinds of things. I know some people, drag him a little bit because his stats dropped this past year. But he had some injuries that he dealt with, some arm injuries, shoulder injuries. He had some illnesses. But if you look at the Missouri pass game as a whole this season, it was not good. I mean, they dropped from 3,671 yards overall in 2023 to just over 2,500 yards this year in 2024. That's not all just because there was a down year from Luther Burden. I mean, Brady Cook, there's a reason we're not talking about Brady Cook necessarily as some kind of top tier quarterback. Well, yeah, in his underwear, everybody was in love with him, but on the football field, he did not have a great year. The limited route tree, I kind of touched on that. Again, that was more due to the scheme and the usage. I don't think it was due to his ability. He shows an ability to be able to run those routes, to run any route you want him to run. They just refused to do anything about that or use him in any way other than, like I said, just trying to force feed him the ball in space as much as possible. He's getting a little bit of a bad rep here on, for maybe some inconsistent effort when you watch him on film when he's not the first read. That's the same kind of thing that, I kind of dragged, and I think we kind of all talked about like the Texas receivers last year too. It seems to be kind of, to me, when I look at things, seems to be more of an organizational thing of how they're taught rather than necessarily something that's endemic to it's endemic to the system. It's not necessarily limited to just Luther Burden. I don't think Luther Burden's lazy. I don't think Luther Burden isn't competitive at all. I think that, he gets in a system where they're going to coach him up. And I think that there's a lot here. When I look at these guys, I'm not some draft guru. I'm looking at guys, I'm looking at their skill sets, and I'm looking at how do I think that will translate to fantasy value down the road. I think that his skill set and the draft buzz that he has right now, I think those will come together to be a player that I can see myself taking quite a bit of in dynasty drafts this year because I love the entire total package.
Okay, all right, some good points there. I'll get to Luther Burden in a minute. He made that long speech, by the way, because he knows I'm gonna have Luther Burden ranked a little bit lower than Jayden Higgins, so he's trying to get the little cherry in on top. But we'll see what Adam does with Jayden Higgins here. Take it away.
Yeah. So first, I like Luther Burden. I think he is. Let me see how to word this. He is
Golden
the best.
Tate.
All right, that was 2 sentences from now. You're skipping ahead. You read my notes. But I was going to say first, I think he is the best person to receive the next Deebo moniker of that grouping. I think he's the best. But that's partially because, thank you, Chris, I think he is more Golden Tate. he doesn't have the physicality of Debo. Now, that's partially a good thing. I actually think he can develop as a route runner. I think he's light on his feet enough to do some of those things. But the problem is, I don't know how much of the yards after contact through physicality can translate to the NFL. I mean, this is a guy who, forget Debo, who came in 20 pounds heavier. He's weighs less than Malachi Corley did coming out, and Corley was 5'8". Like, this isn't the same type of. He's a yards after contact guy, yards after the catch guy, excuse me, for sure, but not the same type at all, I don't think. He is someone who I think is really explosive with the ball in his hands, but someone who, and we can talk about this portion of it as well, and why I think Golden Tate comes to mind. This is a slot guy. Like, he ran 80+% both of the last 2 seasons out of the slot. I don't think that's just because he hasn't gone vertical. I think that when you saw that 10 to 20% of routes where he was on the outside, I don't think he beats press very well at all. Or any matter of fact, I don't think he gets off the line very well. I just don't think he carries that physicality. With the exception of, and I'll agree with you here, I actually think he's a pretty feisty run blocker, just as an aside. But moving to Jayden Higgins, who I adore, I'm sure the highest person on the planet in terms of Jayden Higgins. He's my wide receiver too, so we've gotten through everyone's differing wide receiver twos. I think, and it's funny he comes out in the same class as Ted, because I think both of them just really move like basketball players. Just in the way that at their size, they're still able to sink their hips and move around a little bit, have a little bit of agility. You saw Jayden Higgins look at his shuttle, his 3-cone. They weren't fantastic, but to post above average numbers in those at 6'4", 215 is like, for his size, they were fantastic. Like, let's be real about that. Like, screw the 40, which was great, but screw the 40. Like, I knew the dude could run fast, but like that extra agreement, that extra confidence you get knowing that those cone times came in the way they did, I think is really exciting. He's someone who I think outside of a Tet beats press, up there with the best of them. Someone who, and I think this is undervalued in terms of bigger receivers. There's the short area quickness, which I think for his size he's really great at, but there's also catching the ball on the inside, because it's funny the different body types, how they can catch the ball. Like, you always see the long guys can catch the ball away from their body, and the shorter guys can catch it inside really well, and sometimes flip-flopping that can be a little difficult. I think for a guy with long arms, his ability to catch it inside is actually really, really strong, and catch it around his body, below him, things of that nature. So that's another thing that I really liked about him. I think his route tree is far more developed than Luther Burden, and I think that's a given, right? I mean, we know what Luther Burden is in that regard. Look, Burden is obviously more explosive between the two, but that's not to say that Higgins isn't. I think for his size, he was actually pretty impressive after the catch, and could turn into a bit of a runner after the catch. And then I think, look, just going into the rates, Jayden Higgins' drop rate percentile was 93rd. He just doesn't really drop the ball. That was, I believe, the best in this class, or at least the best of guys that got significant enough volume for me to care too much about, outside of Tesla, who we'll talk about later and is at a different level of competition.
That's my boy.
Yeah, I like Tesla. We'll get to him later, I'm sure. But Higgins' yards per route run was the superior player. The only stat where he wasn't a superior player, and this kind of goes into the quarterbacks, both of them not being very great, the targeted QBR. Otherwise, receiving percentile, drop rate percentile, yards per route run, those all go to Higgins. I think that being in the class with Tet and having a very, very similar skill set has kind of made him a bit overshadowed. But I think just the way that he's able to move his feet and sink his hips at his size, that he has really good body control. Again, you can see a lot of giraffes at his size, but I think he handles himself very, very well. And I'm excited about what he can be in the next level.
All right. So let's get to it here. Slight edge to Jayden Higgins on and Chase. You made a lot of great arguments over Luther Burden. This is more me having to eat it in my pre-combine process than anything else. Look, right now I have Jayden Higgins ranked at 5 and Luther Burden ranked at 6. I was not big on Jayden Higgins coming into the pre-combine draft process. I like that he ran routes. He was very, no doubts there. Makes sharp cuts everywhere, gets separation, intermediate part of the field. Didn't look like this guy could separate downfield. Didn't look like he had a second gear. Was good in the red zone. But I'm looking at him like, just remind me of Alan Lazard. Like, you're good in the intermediate part of the field. You have good hands. You know how to use your body. You get the contested catches, but there's no next level gear to you. Are you really going to be anything more than a complimentary wide receiver? And then he ran a 4.47. Now, I will say this. I don't see the 4.47 speed on tape. And I went back and watched the tape, and I still don't see the 4.47 speed on tape. But the fact that he could go to that athletic ability means that, hey, a couple of things. I mean, one, you heard Matthew Golden, right? When he ran his 4.29, well, I didn't have to run that fast in Texas. Why don't see it show up on tape? Same argument could be made for Jayden Higgins. And when I go back through all of his routes, and I'm starting to think to myself, you know what? This dude reminds me of Adam Thielen. And if you're Adam Thielen with speed, that could be one hell of a wide receiver. So that's when I look at Jayden Higgins, I'm seeing a guy who has an extra level that I did not necessarily see before. Now, on the Luther Burden side, Chase, just so you know, I do have him comp to Deebo Samuel, and I hate it. It felt gross to do it. It really did. For a number of reasons. One, it's a common comp. I don't like giving common comps. It's not my thing. But two, I thought you were going to go a different way with this during your argument, where you say like, "Hey, I'm not comping him to Deebo because, or I wouldn't comp him to Deebo because he doesn't get pigeonholed there." I thought you were going to go a different direction, where he comps to Deebo, but not in the sense of where people usually try to make that comp to Deebo, like the Laviska Shenaults of the world, the guys they think are could be part-time running backs. Where I comp him to Deebo at is the routes. It's very rounded, but he's a dagger over the middle of the field. You get the ball in his hands. He does play with that physicality. Number one in missed tackles forced. He is going to be a yak monster, 100%. And I think it was Adam who said this, or maybe it was Chase. I think it was Adam who actually said this. Like, you're not Deebo, so you can actually, or no, it was Chase, it was you, sorry. That you can actually play, develop into a better wide receiver. Because that's the one thing with Deebo, too. Because he was so heavy on his feet, I don't think there was ever any chance he was ever going to get better as a route runner. Burden might have that opportunity. Not copying to Deebo because I think he's going to play part-time running back. It's the way he plays the wide receiver position, the way he plays routes. You got him at 5 and 6, slight little edge there to Jayden Higgins.